They said the bridge had been dark for 10 long years, forgotten by time, abandoned by faith. But when a tired veteran and his loyal dog found shelter beneath it, something began to shine again. What started as a single flicker of light became a miracle that healed a whole town. Because sometimes God doesn't rebuild places, He rebuilds people. And He does it through hands covered in dust, through hearts that still believe in warmth after the storm. This story isn't about a bridge. It's about redemption, loyalty, and the quiet way love brings light back into the world. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that prove even the coldest winter can't dim the light of faith. The cold lay heavy over Maple Creek, a small Oregon town drowned in silence and frost. Beneath the old wooden bridge where the river whispered beneath thin sheets of ice, a faint fire struggled to survive. Ethan Walker, 49, crouched near its weak glow, cupping his hands around it as if protecting the last candle of his faith. His coat, once army green, was bleached and torn, his gloves patched with tape. His face bore the weary geometry of a man who had outlived his purpose. Angular jaw, hollow cheeks, and eyes faded from too many sleepless nights. Those eyes had once scanned battlefields for threats. Now they searched only for warmth. Beside him, Ranger, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a thick black and tan coat, lay curled against the snow. One ear was slightly bent, scarred from an explosion long ago. His amber eyes glowed in the flickering light, sharp yet gentle, as if carrying the same unspoken weight his master did. Ranger had followed Ethan home from war, though home had long since stopped being a place. Together they lived by small repairs, fixing heaters, clearing snow, patching roofs, for food and quiet thanks. To the people of Maple Creek, Ethan was that vet under the bridge. To Ranger, he was still the man who once saved him from fire and shrapnel. The night deepened. Wind howled through the gaps in the bridge like a morning choir. Ethan sat in silence, one hand resting on Ranger's head, the other feeding the flame with broken twigs. He thought of Baghdad, the sound of metal screaming through air, the sudden stillness after the blast that had taken 3 of his men. He had built bridges for the army, strong enough to hold tanks, yet couldn't build one across his own loneliness. The fire snapped, scattering sparks like dying stars. Then, without warning, Ranger lifted his head and growled, low and guttural. Ethan turned, scanning the darkness. "What is it, boy?" Ranger barked once, sharp, then again, more urgent this time. Ethan grabbed his flashlight, thumb pressing the cracked switch. A beam of pale light cut through the fog. Snowflakes shimmered like dust in a cathedral's air. At first he saw nothing but shadows of trees and the faint outline of the frozen river. Then, movement. Something collapsed near the far bank. He squinted. A human shape, small and motionless. "Stay," he told Ranger, though the dog ignored him and bounded ahead, paws sinking into the snow. Ethan followed, boots crunching hard against the ice. The figure was a woman, elderly, wrapped in a heavy brown coat powdered white. Her silver hair clung to her cheeks, her lips blue from cold. She wasn't dead. Her chest rose faintly. Her right hand clutched a torn canvas bag, knuckles white. Ethan knelt, brushing snow from her face. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes pale as winter sky. "The bridge," she whispered. "I dropped the light." Her voice trembled like cracked glass. Ethan glanced down and found a lantern half buried beside her, its glass shattered. He tucked it under his arm and lifted her gently. She felt weightless, brittle, as though made of paper and breath. Ranger circled close, barking once, then leading the way toward the bridge. As Ethan carried her, the world seemed to fold into silence but for the creak of the wood beneath his boots. Every step echoed in his ribs. The woman stirred once, murmuring, "Arthur built this bridge, said it would outlast our names." Ethan frowned, unsure if she spoke from dream or memory. "Hang on, ma'am," he said quietly. "We're almost there." Across the river, a faint yellow glow flickered from a lone cabin. He had seen that house before, half hidden by pine and thyme. People said it had been abandoned for years, yet tonight a light burned behind its frost-coated window. He hesitated only a moment before crossing. Ranger waited at the door, snow glistening on his back like salt. Ethan knocked, once, twice. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and old metal. A small stove flickered at the center, casting long, amber shadows. Shelves were stacked with books, jars of nails, and dismantled radios. It looked less like a home and more like a museum someone refused to leave. Ethan laid the woman on a faded couch near the stove, covering her with a quilt he found on a chair. On a table sat a framed photo. A man in overalls standing beside a wooden bridge, smiling faintly, the same eyes as the woman. On the back of the frame, a date, 1958. Ethan murmured, "Arthur, huh?" and felt something like respect or kinship stir in him. The woman stirred again, eyes half open. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, voice thin but certain. "They don't like strangers." Ethan frowned. "Who's they?" No answer. Her head tilted, her breath slow, as if she had slipped somewhere far beyond pain. He sat back, exhausted, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He'd carried civilians out of ruins before, people who'd lost everything but a heartbeat. He'd promised himself those days were behind him. Yet here he was again, with another fragile life in his arms and no map out of the storm. Ranger shifted near the window, a low rumble in his throat. Ethan followed his gaze. Through the frost-laced glass, a flicker moved near the bridge, a distant lantern's glow, then nothing. The snow swallowed it whole. He turned off the flashlight and stood listening. Only the wind replied. When he turned back, the woman slept, her breathing steadier. On the table beside her lay an unsealed envelope, yellowed with age. Faded ink read, "To whoever keeps the light." Ethan's fingers hovered above it, hesitating. Ranger pressed his muzzle against his leg, eyes locked on the window again. Outside, the same mysterious light flared once more, closer this time, before vanishing into the white. Ethan exhaled slowly, feeling a quiet, unsettling certainty settle in his chest. "All right," he whispered to himself, sliding the letter toward him. "Let's see what kind of place we've just walked into." Morning crept softly over the valley, brushing pale light across the frozen trees. Inside the cabin by the river, warmth flickered from the old iron stove, painting the walls with a faint orange pulse. Ethan Walker stirred awake in the chair where exhaustion had left him, the blanket slipping from his shoulders. Ranger, his 6-year-old German shepherd, was already awake, lying near the fire, tail thumping once as his amber eyes met Ethan's. On the couch, the old woman he had rescued the previous night slept beneath a quilt patterned with fading flowers. The air smelled of smoke, cedar, and the sweet edge of ginger tea. When she finally opened her eyes, Ethan was beside her, quietly checking her pulse the way he once did for soldiers under rubble. "You're safe," he said, his voice low, almost gentle. The woman studied him, her gaze steady despite her frailty. Her face bore deep, graceful lines, silver hair tucked behind her ears, and eyes the pale blue of thawing ice. "You were military," she said. "I can see it in the way you hold yourself, ready for something that never comes." She smiled faintly. "My husband was the same." Ethan nodded once, unwilling to unravel that thread. "Name's Ethan Walker," he said. "You nearly froze out there." She adjusted her blanket, voice steadier now. "I'm Margaret Owens. This house has been mine for longer than I can remember, though it's much quieter than it used to be. I suppose I owe you thanks, and maybe breakfast." She motioned toward the kettle on the stove, and Ethan stepped forward to pour water. Steam rose, mingling with the scent of ginger. "You have a good manner," she said softly. "Kindness looks right on a soldier's face, makes the scars behave." Ethan gave a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. Ranger, now sitting alert beside the couch, drew her attention. "And who's this gentleman?" she asked. "Ranger," Ethan replied. "Found him overseas. He wouldn't let me leave without him." Margaret's eyes warmed. Animals know things people forget. That one looks like he's keeping more promises than most men ever could. The old radio on the shelf crackled faintly, and she turned toward it with affection. "Arthur built that radio," she said. "He believed if the world ever went quiet, the river would carry our voices. I still talk to him through it sometimes." Ethan's gaze lingered on the dusty dials. "Maybe that's not foolish," he murmured. "Talking keeps the ghosts gentle." As the morning passed, she insisted he eat, pressing a slice of dry bread into his hand. "You'll stay here through the winter," she said with matter-of-fact certainty. "Roof leaks, chimneys sick, and I'm too stubborn to die fixing them. You can have food and a warm fire, and I can have someone who knows how to hold a hammer." Ethan hesitated, the instinct to keep moving tugging at him, but when he looked at Ranger, already settled by the stove, he exhaled. "All right," he said, "for a while." Margaret smiled, the wrinkles around her mouth deepening. "Good. It's been years since another heartbeat stayed long enough to echo in this house." Outside, the river moved under its icy skin, whispering to itself. That afternoon, Ethan climbed to the roof with a hammer and a handful of nails. The air was sharp, blue, and clear. Sunlight danced on the frozen current below. From the porch, Margaret watched, her shawl drawn tight around her narrow shoulders. Her posture was frail, yet dignified, the quiet grace of someone who had spent a lifetime bending without breaking. "Arthur built that bridge with his hands," she called. "Said it would stand longer than his name." Ethan ran his glove over the railing, tracing the initials carved long ago. A+M, 1957. "Seems he was right," he said. She smiled but didn't answer, her gaze distant, fixed somewhere between memory and the drifting snow. The sound of an engine broke the stillness. Ranger barked once, head lifting toward the tree line. A moment later, an old pickup appeared, crawling down the path. The man who stepped out was short and round, with a red wool hat and cheeks flushed from the cold. "Afternoon, Miss Owens," he shouted. "Heard the bridge light came on last night. Gave half the town something to gossip about." His name was George Tully, the supply man. Around 70, he smelled faintly of tobacco and kerosene, his voice bright but anxious. Margaret laughed. "George, this is Mr. Walker. He's helping me through the winter." George's smile faltered slightly when he looked at Ethan's broad frame and weathered face. "A veteran, huh? Well, good to see new blood. That your dog? Big fella." Ethan nodded. "He only bites if you lie." George blinked, unsure if it was a joke, then forced a laugh. As George stacked wood on the porch, he leaned closer to Margaret. "Strange talk in town lately," he muttered. "Folks saying they've seen lights under the bridge again, moving around like lanterns in the fog." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Again?" He shrugged. "Same stories as always. But people swear it's true this time." Ethan caught the tremor in the man's hands as he adjusted his gloves. Fear disguised as gossip. When George left, the truck rattled away into silence. Margaret sighed. "People see ghosts when they can't face their own reflection," she said. Ethan glanced toward the bridge. "Maybe. Or maybe they see something real and wish it weren't." Evening settled, blue and quiet. Ethan sealed cracks in the chimney, his breath fogging the cold air. Inside, Margaret sat by the fire, knitting slowly, humming a hymn that wove through the smell of burning pine. The radio on the desk clicked faintly, though no one touched it. Ranger's ears lifted, his gaze fixed on the device. Margaret noticed, too. Arthur used to say the river carries voices when the wind turns east. she murmured. "Sometimes it hums like he's still tuning in." Ethan half smiled. "Maybe he's just checking your roof repairs." She chuckled, but her eyes lingered on the radio longer than the joke required. Outside, the bridge stood dark against the snow, the only sound the river breathing beneath it. That night, when Margaret had gone to bed, Ethan sat near the stove with Ranger curled beside him. He stared at the old radio, its dull orange light pulsing like a heartbeat. The longer he listened, the more he thought he could hear something faint beneath the static. Not a voice exactly, but a rhythm, like distant knocking on wood from somewhere under the floorboards. Ranger's head lifted, ears stiff. Ethan tilted his head, the hairs on his arms rising. Maybe it was the river shifting ice, or maybe it wasn't. He stood, turned off the lamp, and peered through the window. Snow drifted softly across the bridge, but beyond it, just for a moment, a pale glimmer moved beneath the planks, like a lantern swaying under water. When he blinked, it was gone. He sat back down, Ranger still watching the door. "Easy, boy," he whispered. Yet even as the fire dimmed, the faint hum of the radio continued, steady, patient, waiting. Morning broke over Maple River with a pale silence, the kind that made even footsteps sound louder. Frost clung to the bridge railings and silvered the old lamp that hung crookedly near the riverbank. Ethan Walker, wrapped in his faded jacket, carried a toolbox across the snow. Ranger, his 6-year-old German shepherd, padded beside him, ears twitching to every sound. The lamp had stood dark for 10 years, ever since Arthur Owens, the bridge's builder, passed away. Now, Margaret Owens, Arthur's widow, had asked Ethan to fix it. So the river might remember its light. It was the kind of request Ethan couldn't refuse, though he didn't quite know why. The ladder creaked under his boots as he climbed. The metal frame of the lamp groaned, shedding flakes of rust. When Ethan unscrewed the glass casing, something slid loose and fell into the snow. An envelope, yellowed and fragile, sealed with half-melted wax. He picked it up and brushed the frost away. Inside was a note written in trembling cursive. "When the road ends, let the light lead you." Beneath the words was a pencil sketch of the bridge, marked with a faint X under its base. Ethan stared at it, a chill creeping through his gloves. "What do you think, boy?" he whispered. Ranger tilted his head, eyes bright and wary as if sensing something hidden in the cold air. Later, when Ethan showed the note to Margaret, the old woman held it to her chest, her thin hands trembling. "Arthur used to write like this," she murmured, her eyes glistening. "He left messages after his heart grew weak, said he wanted me to find him in pieces of light." Her voice broke into a smile that carried both warmth and pain. "He built that lamp with his own hands, said it would outlive us both." Ethan nodded, his voice low. Maybe he was right. Maybe he just needed someone to listen again. Margaret looked at him with quiet understanding. "You sound like a man who's lost something." Ethan paused before answering. "Just trying to fix what's left." The morning stretched on. Ethan replaced the corroded wires, straightened the bent frame, polished the lens until it caught the faintest sunlight. Each hammer strike echoed softly over the river. Ranger lay close, head resting on his paws, his breath fogging the air. Every so often he lifted his head, ears pricking toward the bridge's creaks and the faint sound of water moving under the ice. When the last bolt tightened, Ethan stepped down and flipped the switch. At first, only silence. Then, with a small hiss, the bulb flared. Weak, trembling, then steady. Golden light spilled across the frozen water, glinting like spilled honey. From the porch, Margaret gasped. "Arthur would have loved this," she said, wiping her eyes. Ethan smiled faintly. "It's just a lamp." "No," she whispered. "It's a promise." She shuffled back inside, leaving Ethan staring at the bridge. Ranger barked once, low, uncertain. "What is it?" Ethan followed his gaze. Beneath the bridge, something glimmered, a sharp reflection, not ice. He stepped closer, but the river's mirror fractured the image into shards of light. "Probably a nail," he muttered, though his voice betrayed doubt. Ranger growled softly, tail stiff. The moment passed as the wind swept snow across their tracks. By afternoon, a stranger approached along the frozen path. Harold Benton, a county surveyor, mid-50s, bundled in a brown coat and scarf, carried a weather-stained satchel. His face was long and lean, with deep creases around his eyes, the look of a man who'd spent his life measuring land and silence. "Heard someone revived the old lamp," he said, tipping his cap. "Thought I'd check the wiring before the next freeze. Last thing we need is another short circuit." Margaret welcomed him inside, offering tea, but his eyes kept drifting toward the bridge. Outside, he joined Ethan near the lamp. "You from around here?" Ethan asked. "Born 2 towns over," Harold replied. "Used to fish under this bridge as a kid. Funny thing, though, my records say this lamp's been off the grid for over a decade. No power connected since '09. Ethan frowned. "I rewired it from the old station uphill." Harold raised an eyebrow. "That station's been dead since the flood." His words hung in the cold air like smoke. He tightened his scarf, uneasy. "Be careful around that bridge. Some things in this river don't stay buried." Then he turned and left, footprints fading into snow. That evening, Ethan returned to the bridge with Ranger trotting at his side. The light burned steady now, casting warm ripples over the ice. Kneeling, he peered down where he'd seen the reflection earlier. Beneath a thin crust of ice lay something rectangular, metallic, wedged between the wooden beams. He took a long iron rod and pried gently until the object came free. Cold water rushed up, numbing his hands, but he dragged the object out. A rusted tin box bound by 2 corroded latches. The metal burned against his palms from the chill. He forced one latch open. Inside lay a brass compass, its glass cracked but needle trembling north, and a folded photograph. Under the lamp's glow, the photo revealed Arthur Owens, decades younger, standing proudly on the bridge with another man. Tall, clean-shaven, wearing a mechanic's uniform. Both smiled toward the camera, light reflecting off the same lamp now reborn. On the back, written faintly, "For the one who keeps the light alive, you'll know when to follow." Ethan's breath caught. Ranger whined, pressing close, pawing at the box. Ethan crouched beside him, the old boards creaking under their weight. He looked down at the river, and for a heartbeat, thought he saw another light shimmer beneath the ice, faint but steady, as if answering the one above. He blinked, and it vanished. Ethan closed the box and looked back toward the cabin. Margaret's window glowed softly in the dusk. "Come on, boy," he said, voice low but steady. Ranger followed, glancing over his shoulder once more toward the bridge. Behind them, the lamp flickered, then steadied again, its reflection trembling across the river like a secret waiting to rise. The wind carried word faster than any paper could. Within 2 days, the story of the Maple Bridge's light returning spread across the small town like smoke through dry pine. People came in scarves and heavy coats, boots crunching in the snow, murmuring as they stared at the warm glow that shimmered over the frozen river. Some lit candles at the railings, others left coffee or old postcards as if paying tribute to a memory they didn't fully understand. Ethan Walker stood beside the lamppost, hands in his pockets, watching quietly while Ranger, his German shepherd, sat by his side, tail sweeping faint arcs in the snow. For years this bridge had been forgotten, left to rot. Now it was alive again. Not just wood and bolts, but something breathing, something waiting. Among the visitors stood Tom Harlan, a man whose name was whispered through town hall meetings and construction plans. He was in his early 50s. Tall but slightly heavy-set, with slicked-back dark gray hair and a face both charming and calculating. His coat was expensive, black wool over a charcoal suit, but his eyes were colder than the wind off the river. He approached with a smile that didn't quite reach them. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, his tone polite but hollow. "This bridge has character, but nostalgia doesn't pay the bills." Ethan turned his gaze toward him, expression unreadable. "Some things aren't meant to be sold," Harlan chuckled, brushing snow from his gloves. "Maybe not sold, but rebuilt. I have a vision for this place. A riverside resort. Jobs, tourism, progress. The kind of thing old towns need to stay alive." His words hung in the air like frost. Ethan didn't answer, only glanced at Ranger, whose low growl spoke louder than words. Later that afternoon, Ethan helped Margaret Owens welcome the crowd, making sure the candles didn't blow out. The old woman seemed younger that day, laughter returning to her face as she poured coffee for strangers and told stories of her husband Arthur, the man who'd built the bridge. A young reporter named Sarah Collins arrived to take photos. She was in her late 20s, slim and lively, with auburn hair escaping from her knit cap and cheeks flushed red by the cold. Her gray-green eyes sparkled with curiosity. "You're the man who fixed it?" she asked Ethan, voice quick and eager. He nodded, modest as always. "It just needed a little care." Sarah grinned. "Sometimes that's all anything needs." She took pictures of the bridge, then of Ranger, who posed solemnly like he understood the importance of the moment. Yet behind the small-town warmth, Ethan noticed Harlan lingering near the edge of the crowd, phone pressed to his ear, watching the lamp more than the people. When evening fell, the visitors left one by one. The candles guttered out, leaving only the steady glow of the lamp and the faint hum of the river beneath ice. Inside the cabin, Margaret sat by the fire, humming softly while Ethan finished his supper in silence. The photograph and compass from the tin box lay on the table, catching the flicker of the flames. He couldn't shake the thought of Harlan's words. You rebuilt, progress, bills. To men like him, faith and memory were inconveniences, things to be paved over. Ethan had seen that kind of thinking in war zones where everything could be bought with survival or silence. He looked toward Ranger lying by the door, eyes half open, the way soldiers sleep. Ready, listening. "You hear something, don't you?" Ethan asked quietly. Ranger's ears twitched. Outside, the wind was rising, carrying a low hum that sounded almost like a voice. A crash shattered the stillness. Ranger leapt up, barking sharply. Ethan grabbed his flashlight and rushed outside. The cold bit through his jacket as he crossed the snow to the bridge. The lamp was dark. The golden light that had warmed the town was gone, replaced by silence and shards of broken glass scattered across the planks. Ranger sniffed the ground, growling low. The wires had been cut clean, not frayed, deliberate. Ethan crouched and traced the footprints near the base of the post, heavy boots, fresh in the snow, leading back toward the road. His flashlight caught a glint on the ground, a small metal tag stamped with the words Harlan Construction Co. He stood there for a long moment, the wind roaring around him. Anger burned through the cold, steady and sharp. He'd seen destruction before, on foreign soil, under orders in the name of progress, and it had always ended the same. Silence, regret, and too many graves. His hand tightened into a fist. "You built this bridge to last, Arthur," he murmured, "and I'll be damned if I let them tear it apart." Ranger whined softly, pressing against his leg as if understanding that a quiet war had just begun. Ethan looked out at the dark river where the lamp's reflection used to shimmer. For a fleeting moment he thought he saw a faint glow under the ice again, pulsing like a heartbeat, and it steadied something inside him. Back inside, Margaret waited, worry creasing her face. "What happened?" she asked. "Someone cut the line," Ethan said simply. She nodded slowly, lips trembling. "It's starting again." "What do you mean?" he asked, but she didn't answer, only stared toward the window where the bridge's shadow lay dark across the snow. "Arthur used to say the bridge tests those who touch its light. Some give, some take, but few listen." Ethan exhaled, too tired for riddles. Then maybe it's time someone finally did. He gathered his tools, eyes steady now. Ranger lay down beside the door, waiting. The night wind rattled the windows, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke from the far side of the river, and Ethan knew Harlan's men were already moving. By midnight, he had rewired the lamp by hand. The light returned with a hiss and flare, brighter than before, defiant against the dark. Ethan stood beneath it, breath clouding in the cold, while Ranger kept watch beside him. Across the river, in the distant dark, he could swear he saw two headlights pause on the road, then turn away. The bridge groaned softly in the wind, like something waking from a dream. Ethan touched the railing, rough beneath his gloved hand, and whispered, "We're not done yet." The lamp's glow shimmered across his face, and for a brief second he thought he heard a whisper rising from beneath the boards. Faint, like a voice carried by the current. "Keep the light." He didn't move, only stood there as snow began to fall again, the bridge holding its breath beneath him. Morning broke gray and cold, the air so still that even Ranger's breath lingered like smoke. The river beneath the maple bridge whispered faintly under its thin coat of ice. Ethan Walker moved carefully across the frozen planks, toolbox in hand, his boots creaking in the silence. Ranger, the loyal 6-year-old German shepherd, trotted ahead, nose low to the ground, tail straight and tense. They had come back to inspect the damage from the night before, but something about the air felt different now, heavier, as if the bridge itself was holding its breath. The lamp Ethan had rewired still glowed weakly in the dawn, its light flickering over frost like a heartbeat struggling to continue. Ethan crouched beside the lamp post, tracing the cut wires. The edges were clean, deliberate. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. "Professional," he muttered. Ranger sniffed near the post, then suddenly barked, pawing toward the side beam of the bridge. "What is it, boy?" Ethan followed, kneeling near the spot where the snow had been disturbed. The wood beneath was uneven, with a faint rectangular outline. He brushed the frost away, revealing an old hatch, its edges sealed with rusted nails and mud hardened by time. He hesitated. It was small, barely enough for a man to crawl through. "Arthur, what were you hiding?" he whispered. Taking a crowbar from his belt, he began prying the nails loose, each groan of wood echoing like a sigh from the bridge's spine. When the last nail gave way, the hatch lifted to reveal darkness below. A stale breath of air rose up, cold, metallic, smelling faintly of oil and dust. Ranger peered down, ears flattening, his growl deep and uncertain. Ethan descended slowly, boots scraping against a wooden ladder that seemed ready to crumble under his weight. The beam of his flashlight swept across a cramped space lined with old timbers and cobwebs. At the center lay a small iron chest, half buried under rags and rusted tools. He knelt and brushed the dust away. On its lid was engraved a faded emblem, the Maple Trust Fund. His pulse quickened. He forced the lock with the crowbar and opened it. Inside were brittle papers, maps, and a folded legal deed, edges brown with age. The words were faded but clear enough. The land surrounding Maple Bridge, including the riverbanks and adjacent forest, was marked as community property under public trust. Ethan's throat tightened. "This isn't just about a bridge," he murmured. "It's about ownership." Ranger barked once, echoing through the hollow space as if affirming what Ethan already knew. Tom Harlan wasn't building progress, he was burying truth. Before Ethan could climb back up, the sound of a distant engine rumbled through the still air. He froze, listening. The hum cut off abruptly. Silence. Then the faint slam of a car door. He switched off his flashlight, every instinct from his soldier days returning in a single breath. Ranger's low growl rose again, soft but warning. Ethan climbed out of the hatch, pushing the wooden cover back in place, and crouched behind the railing. Across the river, a dark pickup truck sat idling at the tree line, its headlights off. Two silhouettes stood beside it. Men in heavy coats, one tall and square-shouldered, the other shorter, wearing a bright orange cap that glowed faintly against the snow. The taller man gestured toward the bridge, his movements sharp, purposeful. Ethan couldn't see their faces, but he could feel the threat in their posture. These weren't curious locals. They were watchers. He waited until the truck pulled away before returning to the cabin. Margaret was by the window, her shawl draped around her thin shoulders, a mug of tea cradled in her hands. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said quietly. Ethan set the metal box on the table. Not a ghost, something real. He opened it, laying out the papers, the official seals still faintly visible under dust. Arthur and his men set up a fund years ago. The Maple Trust. The land was donated for the community. That means no one, not even Harlan, can legally build here. Margaret's hands trembled as she touched the documents. "Arthur tried to protect this place," she whispered. "But after he died, the papers disappeared. I thought maybe the river took them." Ethan shook his head. "No, someone hid them here, under the bridge. Maybe he knew this day would come." The door opened quietly. Sarah Collins, the young reporter, stepped inside, cheeks flushed from the cold. She carried her camera around her neck and a notebook under her arm. "I saw tire tracks near the bridge," she said. "Did something happen?" Ethan nodded, gesturing to the box. "You're looking at the reason someone tried to destroy the lamp." Sarah leaned over the table, her gray-green eyes scanning the yellowed maps. "This could expose Harlan. These documents show the land belongs to the people." She looked up, determined. "If I publish this, he'll have to stop." Margaret shook her head. "He'll come after anyone who stands in his way." Sarah straightened, jaw tightening. "Let him. Truth doesn't belong to him either." Ethan studied her, her steady gaze, the way she hid fear under defiance. He recognized that look. He'd seen it in soldiers who refused to give up, no matter the cost. Ranger barked again, loud this time, pacing near the door. The sound of gravel crunching under tires rolled through the cold. Ethan moved to the window. A black SUV was pulling up outside, snow dust swirling around its wheels. "They're here," he said calmly. Sarah's eyes widened. "Who?" "Harlan's men." He turned to Margaret. "Hide these." She slipped the papers under a loose floorboard while Ethan reached for the iron wrench by the stove. Ranger stood at his side, fur bristling. Two men stepped out of the SUV, both wearing heavy parkas, faces shadowed by hoods. One knocked sharply on the door. "Mr. Walker?" The voice was firm, polite, but it carried a warning underneath. Ethan opened the door just enough to see their eyes, flat, unblinking. "Morning," he said evenly. "Cold day for visitors." The taller man smiled thinly. "We're just checking on the bridge. Safety concerns. You wouldn't want anyone getting hurt." His words dripped with mock courtesy. Ethan didn't move. "The bridge is fine. You can go." The man's smile faded. "We'll see about that." After they left, silence settled like snow. Margaret exhaled shakily. "They know." Ethan nodded. "Then we're out of time." He placed his hand on Ranger's head, feeling the warmth beneath his palm. "We'll protect this place, even if it means standing alone." The dog leaned into his touch, eyes bright and unwavering. Outside, the lamp flickered once, then steadied again, its light stretching across the river like a vow written in gold. Ethan watched it from the doorway, jaw set. "There's something under that bridge," he whispered, "and they're not the only ones who know it now." By late afternoon, the sky over Maple River had turned the color of tarnished steel. Clouds rolled in low and heavy, their underbellies streaked with violet light. The first drops of rain came as whispers against the roof, but within minutes, the storm broke into a roar. Ethan Walker stood by the window of the cabin, watching the world vanish behind veils of water. The wind howled through the valley, bending trees and rattling shutters. Ranger, his 6-year-old German shepherd, paced restlessly near the door, ears pricked, body tense. Storms unsettled him. The scent of ozone reminded him of gunfire, of distant nights when thunder wasn't the only thing falling from the sky. Ethan felt the same tightness in his chest, a soldier's instinct, honed by years of waiting for the sound that changes everything. The power went out with a click. The lamp on the bridge still burned faintly, its golden glow struggling against the storm. Ethan threw on his jacket and checked the window latch when a sharp knock came from the door. It was Sarah Collins, drenched and breathless, her auburn hair plastered to her face, camera bag slung over her shoulder. "The river's rising fast," she said, voice trembling with urgency. "There's been an accident. Someone's car went off the north embankment. The sheriff's lines are down." Ethan grabbed his flashlight and rope. "Who's in the car?" Sarah hesitated, eyes flicking toward the bridge. "They said it's Harlan's nephew. The boy's name is Caleb. He was driving alone when the storm hit." Ethan didn't waste another second. "Stay here with Margaret," he ordered. Sarah shook her head fiercely. Not a chance. Before he could argue, Ranger barked, pushing against the door. The choice was made. Outside, the rain slashed like knives. The air smelled of iron and pine sap, and the sound of the river was no longer a whisper, but a roar. Ethan and Sarah ran toward the bridge, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the torrent in short, trembling bursts. Ranger raced ahead, fur-soaked, tail streaming behind him like a flag. When they reached the embankment, the sight made Ethan's stomach twist. The guardrail was torn away, tire marks gouged into the mud. Below, in the churning dark, the faint outline of a truck shimmered beneath the surface. The headlights flickered like drowning stars. "He's still inside," Sarah gasped. Ethan tied the rope around his waist, looping the other end around a tree trunk. "Hold this," he said. "If I go under, don't pull. Wait for Ranger's signal." Sarah's hand shook as she gripped the line, rain running down her pale face. "You can't." "I can," Ethan cut in. "And I will." Then he dove into the freezing water. The river hit like a wall of glass. Cold ripped through his body, stealing breath and thought. He kicked downward, following the beam of his flashlight through the swirling mud. The truck lay wedged against a fallen log, one window cracked open just enough to see a boy inside. Pale face pressed against the glass, eyes wide with terror. He couldn't have been more than 16. Ethan pounded on the window. The boy's head turned weakly. "Hang on," Ethan shouted, though his voice was swallowed by the current. Above, Ranger barked furiously, pacing the bank. Sarah's silhouette moved against the storm, her flashlight jerking wildly as she tried to keep him in sight. Ethan jammed the crowbar he'd carried into the window seam. The glass gave with a sharp crack. A flood of air bubbles escaped, followed by a desperate gasp as Ethan pulled the door open and grabbed the boy's arm. Together, they kicked free of the sinking truck, breaking the surface just as a wave slammed over them. Ranger leapt into the water without hesitation, swimming hard against the current. The rope jerked tight as Ethan fought to keep the boy's head above the surface. "This way, Ranger," he shouted. The dog barked and turned, leading them toward the shallows. Sarah was already knee-deep in water, pulling at the rope, face contorted with fear and effort. The current tore at them, dragging them sideways. For one heart-stopping second, Ethan lost his footing, but Ranger lunged forward, teeth gripping the rope, and held fast. They stumbled onto the muddy bank, collapsing in a tangle of limbs and soaked clothes. Ethan coughed up river water, chest heaving. The boy lay limp beside him, but his chest was rising. "Caleb," Sarah breathed, kneeling beside him. "He's alive." Headlights flashed through the rain. A black SUV skidded to a halt nearby. Tom Harlan emerged, his hair plastered flat, his expensive coat soaked through. The mask of confidence he always wore had shattered, his face pale, lips trembling. "Caleb!" he shouted, rushing forward. He froze when he saw who held the boy. Ethan stood there, drenched, face streaked with mud, holding Caleb close against him. Behind him, Ranger limped from the river, one paw bleeding, fur matted dark with mud and blood. The sight silenced everyone. Harlan knelt beside his nephew, shaking him gently. Caleb's eyes fluttered open. "Uncle, he saved me," the boy whispered, voice hoarse. Harlan looked up at Ethan, the weight of shame and realization pressing into every line of his face. "You didn't have to," he said quietly. Ethan met his gaze. "Nobody had to, but someone should." They carried Caleb into the SUV, wrapping him in blankets. Sarah handed Harlan her scarf for the boy's head. The businessman's hands shook as he took it, his eyes no longer cold but uncertain, as if the world had tilted in ways he didn't understand. Rain eased into mist, the storm's fury ebbing into silence. Ethan knelt beside Ranger, cleaning the blood from his paw with his torn sleeve. "Easy, buddy," he murmured. The dog whined softly, tail thumping weakly in the mud. "You did good. You did what soldiers do." Sarah crouched beside them, touching Ranger's head gently. "He's brave," she whispered. "He's a hero." Ethan smiled faintly. He always was. As dawn broke, the clouds began to lift, revealing streaks of gold along the horizon. Harlan stood by the river, watching the sun rise over the bridge. "I was wrong," he said finally, voice rough. "The land stays. The bridge stays." He turned to Ethan. "I'll make it right." Ethan nodded once, silent. There was nothing more to say. He looked back toward the lamp, its light still flickering through the thinning fog. But then he saw something, a figure standing beneath it. The shape was faint, almost part of the mist. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing an old worker's coat. For a moment, Ethan thought he saw Arthur Owens, his outline shimmering beside the lamp. The wind carried a soft hum through the beams, like a voice half swallowed by time. Ethan blinked, and the figure was gone. Only the bridge remained, whole and golden in the light of morning. Morning arrived softly over Maple River, the storm's scars still fresh upon the land. The air carried the scent of wet pine and soil, and the light that filtered through the fog was tender, forgiving. Ethan Walker sat on the porch steps, his denim jacket still damp from the night before. Beside him, Ranger, the aging German shepherd, rested his head on Ethan's knee. A white bandage wrapped around the dog's foreleg, the fur matted slightly where dried blood clung, but his eyes were bright again, steady, loyal, alive. The lamp on the bridge burned faintly in the morning mist, its glow soft and golden, like the pulse of something reborn. Ethan watched it in silence, feeling a peace he hadn't known in years, the kind earned through pain, loss, and small miracles that didn't announce themselves with thunder, only with quiet endurance. A knock sounded at the door. Tom Harlan stood there, hat in hand, raincoat unbuttoned, his once polished shoes muddy. The proud gleam in his face was gone, replaced by weariness that aged him more than time ever had. His jawline was still sharp, but his eyes had lost that glassy distance. They were human now, uncertain. "You look like hell," Ethan said, a faint smile tugging his lips. "So do you," Harlan replied with a short, shaky laugh. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents, setting them on the table beside Ethan. "These are the new papers. The land around Maple Bridge, the banks, the fields, even the forest. It'll all be returned to the community under the Maple Trust. I've signed it off." His voice wavered between pride and regret. "I was blinded by ambition. Caleb reminded me what matters." Ethan said nothing for a moment, then nodded. Sometimes we all forget where the light comes from. Later that week, the townsfolk gathered by the river. The air smelled of sawdust and coffee, and laughter carried over the sound of hammering. Sarah Collins, the young journalist, now dressed in a simple green coat and worn boots, took photos as children helped paint the railings. Her cheeks were flushed with joy, her hair tied back loosely, sunlight catching on the strands. The project had become more than repair. It was rebirth. Margaret Owens, frail but smiling, stood at the edge of the bridge watching them with eyes that shone like wet glass. "Arthur would have been proud," she whispered to Ethan. "You kept his promise." Ethan looked at her, his rough hands resting on the railing. "He built it. I just made sure it remembered how to shine." She squeezed his arm lightly. "That's what builders do, even the broken ones." When the bridge was complete, the townspeople unveiled a small brass plaque nailed beside the lamp post. It read, "The Bridge Lighthouse, dedicated to those who keep the light alive." The old cabin by the river had been restored and transformed into a gathering hall, a place where local children could learn carpentry, repair, and stories of the town's past. Ethan and Ranger lived there, caretakers of both the lamp and the spirit it represented. Every morning, Ethan would sweep the porch, feed Ranger, and walk the bridge, checking every beam like a ritual prayer. Sarah often visited, camera in hand, documenting the change. Not the grand kind seen in headlines, but the quiet kind that heals. The townsfolk began calling Ethan the Keeper, and though he laughed it off, he wore the title with unspoken gratitude. One evening, months after the storm, the bridge glowed beneath a sunset painted in rose and amber. Children played by the riverbank while their parents watched from the path, mugs of coffee steaming in their hands. Margaret sat wrapped in a blanket near the lamp, humming the same old tune she'd once sung alone. Ethan joined her, lowering himself slowly onto the bench beside her. His hair, now streaked with more gray than brown, glistened faintly in the last light. Ranger lay at his feet, tail thumping lazily. "Listen," Margaret said, closing her eyes. "You hear that?" Ethan tilted his head. Beyond the laughter, the wind hummed softly through the beams of the bridge, a sound that seemed almost like voices intertwined with the rustling leaves. "The wind's got stories," he said quietly. "Maybe it remembers better than we do." Margaret smiled, eyes still closed. "It's telling you, thank you." As dusk settled, Sarah lit the lamp for the first time since the restoration. The bulb flickered, then steadied, washing the river in gold. The crowd cheered, the sound echoing through the valley. Harlan stood in the back, hat pressed to his chest, eyes damp though he tried to hide it. Caleb, now recovered, stood beside him, face lit with awe. "Is it true," the boy asked, "that if you stand still, you can hear them?" Harlan glanced toward Ethan and smiled faintly. "It's true if you believe it." Ethan watched them from the bridge, his heart full but heavy with the ache of memory. Of the years spent wandering, of friends lost to war, of all the lights that had gone out before this one was found again. He placed his hand on Ranger's head. "We did all right, didn't we, buddy?" Ranger lifted his muzzle, eyes reflecting the lamp's glow, as if answering yes. When night came, the town dispersed, leaving silence and the steady murmur of the river. Ethan remained on the bridge long after the last footsteps faded. The lamp burned above him, its reflection rippling across the water. He thought of Margaret's husband, Arthur, of his own past buried beneath too many miles and faces, and of how the smallest act, repairing a forgotten light, had drawn him back into the world. Ranger stirred, resting his head once more on Ethan's knee. "You hear it, don't you?" Ethan whispered. The dog's ears twitched, and together they listened. The wind moved gently under the bridge, carrying faint echoes. Laughter, a dog's distant bark, the sound of a hammer striking wood. It might have been memory or something more. Either way, Ethan smiled. "The wind's telling our story now," he said softly. Above them, the lamp flared brighter, and for a moment the whole bridge seemed to breathe. Far down the river, beyond where the light could reach, another lamp flickered to life. A fisherman's torch, perhaps, or something older, kindled by faith alone. Its glow joined the reflection of the maple bridge, two golden stars trembling upon the water. Ethan leaned back, closing his eyes. "Keep it shining, boy," he murmured to Ranger, voice fading into the hum of the night. The dog exhaled softly, tail brushing against his boot. And as the wind passed through the beams once more, it carried a sound both familiar and eternal. Part whisper, part prayer, part promise. The bridge speaking to those who had listened, reminding them that light, once found, never truly dies. Sometimes miracles don't come with thunder. They come quietly, through kindness, faith, and the light we keep alive for others. Ethan didn't just rebuild a bridge, he rebuilt faith, proof that God still works through ordinary hands. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and share to keep these stories of hope and loyalty alive. And don't forget to subscribe to The Healing Leash, where every story reminds us that God's light still walks beside us. May God bless you and your loved ones.